With blood still dripping from his knife, the Apache warrior, who had just slaughtered her attackers, now stood between Sarah and her twin babies, his tribe emerging from the shadows with vengeance in their eyes. Her salvation had become her prison, and she had exactly one chance to convince them that not all white settlers deserved to die. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The merciless sun beat down on the barren landscape, turning the air into a shimmering veil of heat that distorted the distant mountains. Dust clung to every surface, working its way into the creases of clothing and the corners of eyes. In this unforgiving desert, where even the hardiest of cacti struggled to survive, Sarah Mitchell pushed forward with the quiet determination of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her wagon creaked beneath her, the wooden wheels straining against the rocky terrain. The two horses pulling it had grown thin during their journey, their ribs visible beneath dull coats. She'd been rationing their water, giving them just enough to keep moving, saving the rest for herself and her precious cargo, twin babies, barely a week old, sleeping in a makeshift cradle beside her. Sarah's face, once soft with youth, had hardened into the weathered mask of a woman who had seen too much in her 24 years. Her husband, James, had succumbed to fever just 3 weeks before the twins' birth, leaving her alone to bring new life into a world that seemed determined to snuff it out. The gold dust sewn into the hem of her dress and the lining of her boots was all that remained of their dreams, enough, she hoped, to start anew in California. Just a little farther, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the horses, the babies, or herself. The ravine appeared suddenly before her, a jagged tear in the earth that offered the promise of shade and perhaps even water. Sarah guided the horses down the gentle slope, relief washing over her as the temperature dropped by several degrees in the shadow of the towering rock walls. That relief was short-lived. The first rider emerged from behind a boulder, his face obscured by a bandana, eyes glinting with malice beneath the brim of a dusty hat. 2 more appeared from the shadows, closing in on the wagon like wolves circling wounded prey. "Well now, what do we have here?" The first man's voice was rough as the terrain around them. "A little lady all alone in Apache country. That's mighty dangerous, ma'am." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the small revolver tucked beneath her seat, but she knew it would be useless against 3 armed men. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to shield the sleeping infants from view. "I have nothing of value," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just seeking passage to California." The leader dismounted, his spurs jingling ominously as he approached the wagon. "Everyone's got something of value, ma'am." His gaze traveled over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "But sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out what—" One of the twins stirred, letting out a thin cry that sliced through the tense air. The man's eyebrows shot up. "Well, I'll be damned. You got young'uns." He leaned over the side of the wagon, his breath sour with whiskey. "Twins, no less. Fetch a good price from certain folks down Mexico way." "No!" Sarah's voice cracked as she threw herself over the cradle. "Please, I beg you." The man grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her flesh. "Begging won't help you none out here, lady." It happened so fast that Sarah would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. A shadow detached itself from the canyon wall, a fluid darkness that moved with deadly precision. The first bandit fell before he could turn, an arrow protruding from his throat. The second reached for his gun, but found a knife between his ribs instead. The leader released Sarah and fumbled for his revolver, firing wildly into the air. The shadow materialized fully then, a man with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes as dark and fathomless as midnight. He moved like water, flowing around the bandits' desperate attacks before delivering a single lethal strike. As the last body crumpled to the ground, silence descended upon the ravine once more. Sarah clutched her babies to her chest, staring at their unlikely savior with a mixture of fear and wonder. He stood tall against the canyon wall, muscular frame adorned with leather and beads. His long black hair was pulled back with a strip of red cloth, revealing high cheekbones and a strong jaw set in an expression of wary assessment. Every inch of him spoke of power contained, of danger controlled. An Apache warrior. Sarah had heard the stories, tales of brutality and savagery that made mothers clutch their children closer and men check their rifles. But this man had just saved her life, and possibly her children's as well. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling woefully inadequate. The warrior's gaze shifted to the twins in her arms, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. He spoke then, his voice deep and unexpectedly smooth. "Not safe here. More will come." Sarah nodded, understanding the warning in his words. "I don't know where to go." The man studied her for a long moment, as if weighing some great decision. Then he moved toward the horses, checking their condition with practiced hands. "I am Takoda," he said finally, glancing back at her. "I will take you to water." And in that moment, with the bodies of her would-be killers cooling on the ground around her, Sarah Mitchell made the choice that would alter the course of her life forever. She placed her trust in the hands of a warrior from a world entirely separate from her own. Takoda moved with the efficiency of a man accustomed to surviving in harsh conditions. He unhitched the exhausted horses, transferring the most essential supplies to their backs instead of the heavy wagon. Sarah watched him work, cradling her twins against her chest, uncertain if she had made the right decision in trusting this stranger. "The wagon?" she asked, glancing at the wooden vehicle that had been her home for weeks. "Too slow, too loud." Takoda's English was clear but sparse, each word chosen with deliberate care. "I'd leave it," Sarah bit her lip, fighting back tears. The wagon had belonged to James, had carried their dreams westward. Abandoning it felt like leaving the last piece of him behind. But the twins stirred against her chest, reminding her that the past was luxury she could no longer afford. "What about?" Her eyes drifted to the bodies of the bandits. "Desert will take them." Takoda secured a water skin to one of the horses. "Others will find them." "We'll know?" "Know what?" Takoda's dark eyes met hers. "That someone killed their friends." A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the heat. She hadn't considered that the bandits might have companions who would seek revenge. The weight of her situation pressed down on her shoulders, alone in foreign territory, with 2 infants depending on her for survival. One of the twins began to fuss, tiny fists waving in the air. The other joined almost immediately, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. Sarah bounced them gently, murmuring soothing words, acutely aware of Takoda watching her. "They're hungry," she explained, feeling inexplicably embarrassed. "I need to feed them." Takoda nodded once and turned his back, providing her with a modicum of privacy. Sarah adjusted her clothing with practiced movements, allowing the first baby to nurse. "Boy?" "Girl?" Takoda asked, his back still turned. "Both boys," Sarah replied, surprised by the question. "William and Henry." Takoda said nothing more, but continued preparing for their departure. Sarah switched babies, wincing slightly as Henry latched on with his usual enthusiasm. She found herself studying the warrior's broad back, the way the muscles moved beneath his skin as he worked. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps no more than 28 or 30. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. "Your people and mine, they aren't friends." Dakota paused, shoulders tensing slightly. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Not all whites are enemies, not all Apache are friends." He secured the last of their supplies. "I judge the person, not the skin." The simplicity of his philosophy struck Sarah with unexpected force. How different from the teaching she had grown up with, the warnings about savage Indians that had been whispered around fires and taught in Sunday schools. "The babies are ready," she said, adjusting her clothing once more. Dakota turned, approaching her with measured steps. He held out his hands. "I can carry one. You take other." "Easier to ride." Sarah hesitated. The thought of handing one of her precious sons to this man, this warrior who had killed 3 men before her eyes with terrifying efficiency, made her heart race. But those same deadly hands had been gentle with the horses, had prepared their escape with careful consideration. She swallowed hard and placed William in Dakota's waiting arms. The warrior cradled the infant with surprising tenderness, adjusting the blanket to shield the tiny face from the sun. Something in his expression shifted as he looked down at the baby, a softening around the eyes, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "He is strong," Dakota said quietly. "Good spirit." Sarah felt an unexpected lump form in her throat. His father never got to hold him. Either of them. Dakota looked up, meeting her gaze. No words of comfort passed his lips, but something in his eyes acknowledged her loss, respected it without trying to diminish it with empty phrases. He helped her mount one of the horses, passing William back to her once she was settled. Then he swung onto the other horse with fluid grace, leading them away from the ravine and the abandoned wagon, following a path visible only to his trained eyes. They traveled in silence for hours, the landscape gradually shifting around them. The stark canyon gave way to sparse vegetation, then to a terrain dotted with juniper and piñon pines. Sarah marveled at how Dakota seemed to find the easiest path for the horses, avoiding loose rocks and dangerous drops with an intuition that spoke of intimate knowledge of the land. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples, Dakota guided them into a small clearing surrounded by boulders. A tiny spring bubbled up from between the rocks, feeding a pool of clear water before disappearing back into the earth. "We rest here," he announced, dismounting with the same fluid movement. "Safe for night." Sarah slid carefully from her horse, her legs stiff and aching from the unaccustomed hours of riding. The twins had fallen asleep during the journey, lulled by the steady motion. Dakota quickly constructed a small shelter, using a blanket stretched between rocks, creating a space shielded from the cooling night air. "For you and children," he said, gesturing to the makeshift tent. Sarah stared at the simple structure, touched by the consideration it represented. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Dakota busied himself with the horses, avoiding her gaze. Sleep, tomorrow, long journey. As Sarah settled into the shelter with her sleeping sons, she found herself wondering about this enigmatic man who had saved them. What drove him? Why risk himself for a white woman and her children? Outside, Dakota sat with his back against a boulder, eyes scanning the darkening landscape, watching, waiting. A sentinel between Sarah's small family and whatever dangers lurked in the gathering shadows of the Arizona night. Dawn broke in whispers of pink and gold across the eastern sky. Sarah awoke to the soft sounds of her twins stirring beside her. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind, the unfamiliar shelter, the hard ground beneath her, before memory rushed back in a flood of images. The bandits, the Apache warrior, their flight through the desert. She sat up carefully, peering out of the makeshift shelter. Dakota crouched by a small, nearly smokeless fire, his hands moving with practiced precision as he arranged something in a battered metal cup. He must have sensed her gaze, for he turned to meet her eyes without surprise. "Water is clean," he said, nodding toward the spring. "You should drink. Wash." Sarah nodded gratefully. She gathered the twins, who were beginning to fuss with hunger, and made her way to the water's edge. After settling the babies on a soft patch of ground, she splashed the cool liquid on her face, gasping slightly at the refreshing sensation. Dakota approached, offering her the cup he had been preparing. Inside was a mixture of crushed leaves and berries. "For strength," he explained. "Safe for milk for babies." Sarah accepted the cup with surprise. "You know about nursing mothers." A shadow passed over Dakota's features. "My sister had child. I learned." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken history. Sarah took a sip of the mixture, bitter but not unpleasant, with undertones of sweetness from the berries. "Had?" she asked gently, sensing a loss that mirrored her own. Dakota's jaw tightened. "Soldiers came to our village 3 summers ago. They did not ask who was warrior and who was not." His eyes met hers, dark with remembered pain. "My sister, her husband, her child, many others." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. He shook his head once, sharply. "Your sorrow does not bring them back." But his gaze softened as it fell on the twins. "You understand loss. You protect your children. This I respect." The twins began crying in earnest now. Sarah arranged herself to feed them, no longer feeling self-conscious under Dakota's respectful gaze. As the babies nursed, she found herself wanting to bridge the gulf of understanding between them. "My husband, James, he was a school teacher," she offered. "We were going to start a new school in California. He believed education could change the world." She smiled sadly. He was always full of big ideas. "A good dream," Dakota said, surprising her. "Knowledge is strength." "You speak English very well," Sarah observed. A hint of bitterness touched his expression. "I was taken to mission school as boy, learned white man's language, white man's God." He gestured to the surrounding landscape. "But I returned to learn my people's ways. Both knowledges make me who I am." Sarah digested this information, seeing Dakota in a new light. He existed between worlds, just as she now found herself caught between her past life and whatever uncertain future awaited her. They broke camp efficiently, Dakota packing their few supplies while Sarah tended to the twins. As they prepared to mount the horses, Dakota suddenly froze, his head tilted slightly as if listening. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, instantly alert to the tension in his posture. "Riders, far still but coming this way." His expression darkened. "We must go. Now." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. The bandits, friends, maybe. Or soldiers. Neither option promised safety for a lone Apache warrior and a white woman with 2 infants. "We ride east, toward mountains." They set off at a pace faster than Sarah would have preferred. The babies secured against her chest with a length of cloth Dakota had fashioned into a carrier. The horses strained beneath them, still recovering from their previous hardships. Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, imagining pursuers gaining ground with every passing minute. "Who were they?" she asked when they paused briefly to rest the horses. "The men you killed. Why were you tracking them?" Dakota's eyes scanned the horizon as he answered. Raid on trading post near Apache land. Killed 2 men, 1 woman. Took supplies. His mouth tightened. Army blamed Apache. Always blame Apache. I tracked real killers to prove truth. You were trying to protect your people, Sarah realized. My people walk narrow path. Army looks for reasons to attack. These men, he spat on the ground, they give reasons. Sarah thought of the casual cruelty in the bandits' eyes as he'd spoken of selling her babies in Mexico, the disregard for human life. They were monsters, she said softly. Men become monsters when they forget others are human. Dakota met her gaze, his expression intense. White, Apache, Mexican, all can be monster or brother. Choice is here. He touched his chest over his heart. The wisdom of his words struck Sarah deeply. How different from the simplistic views she had been raised with, the division of the world into civilized and savage, godly and heathen. They continued their journey through terrain that grew increasingly rugged. Dakota led them along game trails and dry creek beds, avoiding open spaces where they might be spotted. By midday, the mountains loomed closer, their blue shadows promising both sanctuary and challenge. My people have camp in those mountains, Dakota said, as they navigated a particularly steep path. 2 days, journey, maybe less. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Do your people, will they welcome us? Dakota did not immediately answer, his silence more telling than words could have been. Finally, he spoke. I will speak for you. But he glanced at her, his expression grave. They have suffered much at hands of whites. Trust is not easily given. Sarah clutched her babies closer, wondering if she had escaped one danger only to ride directly into another. The days stretched long and tense as they pushed deeper into the foothills. The landscape grew more forgiving. Patches of grass appeared among the rocks, juniper trees provided occasional shade, and small streams cut through the terrain, offering welcome relief from the relentless heat. Yet Sarah found little comfort in these improvements. Each hour brought them closer to Dakota's people, and closer to a confrontation she could not predict. William and Henry had grown fussy, their tiny bodies uncomfortable with the constant motion. When they stopped by a shallow creek to water the horses, Sarah unwrapped the twins from their cloth carrier, laying them on a soft patch of grass. They need to move, she explained to Dakota, who watched with curiosity as she gently exercised their small limbs. It's not good for babies to be bundled too long. Dakota nodded, kneeling beside her. Apache mothers carry babies on cradle boards, strong backs, straight spines. He reached out hesitantly. May I? Sarah nodded, and Dakota placed his hand gently on William's chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath his palm. So small, he murmured, yet fights to live, strong spirit. Henry began to wail, his face turning red with the effort. Sarah moved to pick him up, but Dakota was faster, lifting the infant with surprising gentleness. This one, he said with a hint of amusement, has warrior's lungs. Despite her anxiety, Sarah laughed. Henry has always been the louder one. Even before they were born, he was the one kicking the hardest. A ghost of a smile touched Dakota's lips as he cradled the crying baby, his large hand supporting the tiny head with instinctive care. He began to hum softly, a melody unlike anything Sarah had heard before, haunting and beautiful, with rising and falling notes that seemed to mimic the contours of the mountains around them. Remarkably, Henry's cries subsided, the baby's eyes, still unfocused but seeking, fixed on Dakota's face as if mesmerized by the sound. Sarah watched in astonishment as her usually colicky son settled peacefully in the warrior's arms. How did you do that? she asked when Takoda's song ended, old song for calming spirits. He gently passed Henry back to her. My mother sang to me. I sang to my sister's child. The mention of his lost family brought a shadow back to his features. He stood abruptly, scanning the horizon. We should move. Not safe here. As Sarah prepared the twins for travel again, she noticed Takoda studying the ground intently, his expression growing increasingly troubled. What's wrong? She asked, securing William in the carrier. Tracks. Horse tracks. He pointed to marks in the soft earth that Sarah would never have noticed. Many horses. Army horses. Fear slithered down her spine. How can you tell? Army horses wear same shoes. Same pattern. He crouched, running his fingers lightly over the impressions. Not old tracks. Maybe one day. Are they looking for us? Sarah's voice trembled slightly. Takoda's expression was grim. Maybe looking for men who raided trading post, maybe just patrol. He stood, dusting off his hands. Either way, danger for me, for you, with me. Sarah clutched her babies closer. What do we do? Change direction. Go north first, then east. Harder path, but safer. He helped her onto a horse with Henry, then handed up William. Stay close. Follow exactly where I go. They set off at a careful pace, Takoda leading them away from the creek and into rougher terrain. The horses struggled on the steep inclines, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals through the most difficult passages. Sarah's arms ached from holding the twins, and her legs burned with exertion, but she pushed forward without complaint. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the land, Takoda suddenly raised his hand, signaling for silence. He dismounted in one fluid motion, dropping to the ground where he pressed his ear against the earth. After a moment, he rose, his expression tense. Riders coming. Fast! Sarah's heart lurched. Soldiers! No, different. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. Hide! Now! He led her quickly to a dense thicket of juniper and mesquite, helping her dismount and ushering her into the center of the natural shelter. Stay, no matter what you hear, stay silent. Takoda. Fear made her reach for his arm, her fingers closing around his wrist. He looked down at her hand, then up to her face. Something passed between them in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of the trust that had formed in their short time together. I will not leave you, he said simply. Now hide. Sarah crouched in the thicket, holding the twins close and praying they would remain quiet. Through the branches, she could see Takoda position himself behind a large boulder, his body coiled with tension as he waited. The riders appeared from the south, 3 men on lathered horses, driving their mounts hard. Even from a distance, Sarah could see they weren't soldiers. Their clothes were dusty and mismatched, their faces hidden beneath bandanas pulled up against the dust. More bandits, perhaps friends of the men Takoda had killed. They slowed as they approached, clearly following a trail, their trail. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as one of the men pointed to the ground, then gestured in the direction of the thicket where she hid. William chose that moment to stir, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah froze, her hand moving to gently cover his mouth. Through the branches, she saw the bandits, heads snap up, their attention drawn to the sound. Over there, one of them called, pointing directly at her hiding place. Takoda moved like lightning. The first bandit fell with a knife in his throat before he could even draw his weapon. The second managed to fire a wild shot that whistled harmlessly past Takoda's shoulder before the warrior was upon him, the momentum of his attack carrying both of them from their horses to the ground. The third man wheeled his horse around, aiming his rifle at Takoda's back as he struggled with the second bandit. Sarah watched in horror, knowing Takoda couldn't see the threat behind him. Without conscious thought, she reached for the small revolver still tucked in her skirt pocket, the one she'd carried since leaving home, the one James had insisted she learn to use, just in case. Her hand shook as she aimed at the third rider, her mind flashing to the last time she'd fired the weapon, at tin cans lined up on a fence post, James's steady hand guiding hers. She squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the bandit, throwing off his aim. His rifle discharged into the air as his horse reared in panic. Takoda, having dispatched the second attacker, whirled at the sound, taking in the situation in an instant. He snatched up the fallen bandit's pistol and fired once, twice. The third man toppled from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the nervous whinnying of the bandits, horses, and the renewed crying of both twins, startled by the gunfire. Takoda approached the thicket slowly, his expression unreadable as he looked at Sarah and the revolver still clutched in her trembling hand. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the mountains, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that made Sarah shiver despite the fire Takoda had carefully built in a natural depression where the light wouldn't be visible from a distance. The twins slept bundled together in a nest of blankets, exhausted from the day's trials. Sarah couldn't stop her hands from trembling as she held them out toward the flames. The image of the bandit falling from his horse, the knowledge that she had played a role in taking a human life, these thoughts circled in her mind like hungry wolves. "First killing is hardest," Takoda said quietly, noticing her distress. "It changes something inside." Sarah looked up at him across the fire, his features thrown into sharp relief by the dancing light. "Does it get easier?" she whispered. He was silent for a long moment. "I'm not easier. Different." His eyes met hers. "You did what was necessary, to protect your children, to protect me." "I didn't think," Sarah admitted. "I just acted." The heart knows what the mind cannot decide. Takoda added a small branch to the fire. "My father taught me, hesitation in battle is path to death." "Your father was a warrior?" A hint of pride crossed Takoda's face. "War chief of our band. He died fighting to protect our hunting grounds when I was 16 summers. And your mother lives still. She is medicine woman of our people." He studied Sarah with an intensity that made her flush. "She would see your strength, I think, approve of you." The idea that Takoda had considered how his mother might view her sent an unexpected warmth through Sarah's chest. She looked away, suddenly conscious of how they must appear, sitting close together in the intimate circle of firelight, speaking of family and approval as if... She pushed the thought away. Such notions were dangerous, impossible. "Will your mother be at the camp we're heading to?" she asked, changing the direction of her thoughts. Takoda nodded. "She cares for the children and elders while warriors hunt." His expression grew serious. "Sarah, when we reach my people, there will be those who see only white woman, enemy. Some have lost much to white soldiers, white settlers." "Like your sister," Sarah said softly. "Yes." His voice was heavy with memory. "Some will not understand why I bring you." Fear and uncertainty twisted in Sarah's stomach. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I should try to reach a white settlement instead. "No." The word was sharp, definitive. Takoda leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Bandits still search, army patrols. Desert itself would kill you and children before you find settlement." His expression softened slightly. "I promise to protect you. I keep my word." The twins stirred, Henry letting out a small cry. Sarah moved to check on them, but Takoda was already there, his large hand gently resting on the baby's chest. "Shh, little warrior," he murmured. "All is well." To Sarah's amazement, Henry settled immediately, turning his head toward Takoda's voice. The warrior looked up, meeting her surprised gaze with a small smile. "He knows me now," he said simply. Something shifted in Sarah's heart as she watched this fierce man tenderly soothing her child, a feeling she wouldn't name. "We should rest," Takoda said, withdrawing his hand. "Dawn comes early." "Our journey tomorrow." Sarah nodded, arranging her blanket near the twins, while Takoda positioned himself on the opposite side of the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The events of the day played through her mind in vivid flashes. The bandits attacking, the gunshot, Takoda's acknowledgement that she had saved his life. "Takoda," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes." His reply was immediate. He hadn't been sleeping either. "I thank you for everything." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Finally, he replied, "Sleep now, Sarah Mitchell." It was the first time he had spoken her name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart beat faster. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim her. Morning came too soon, the eastern sky blushing with first light, when Takoda woke her with a gentle touch on her shoulder. "But we must go," he said. "Long journey today." They ate a quick meal of jerky and dried berries that Takoda had packed, then prepared to depart. As Sarah secured the twins in their carrier, she noticed Takoda studying the terrain ahead, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked. "We enter Apache hunting grounds today." He pointed to the mountains rising before them. "My people watch these paths. They will see us coming. Will they attack?" Fear made her voice quaver. "No. They will recognize me." He hesitated. "But word will reach camp before we arrive. They will be prepared." The implication was clear, prepared to deal with the white woman Takoda brought into their midst. Sarah swallowed hard, looking down at her sleeping sons. "What will happen when we get there?" Takoda's expression was solemn. "I will speak to council." "Explain." He placed a hand on her shoulder, the touch sending warmth through her despite her fear. "Trust me, Sarah." She looked up into his dark eyes, seeing the determination there, the promise of protection. Whatever awaited them in the Apache camp, she knew with sudden certainty that Takoda would stand between her and harm, just as he had in the ravine with the bandits. "I trust you," she said, and meant it. They mounted the horses and set off into the rising sun, climbing steadily into the mountains where Takoda's people waited. With each hoofbeat, Sarah felt herself moving further from the world she had known and deeper into an uncertain future where the only constant was the man riding beside her. The mountains embraced them with rugged arms of stone and pine. As they climbed higher, the air grew sweeter, cooler, filled with the scent of resin and wild herbs. In another time, under different circumstances, Sarah might have found beauty in the landscape, the sweeping vistas, the play of light and shadow across distant peaks. Now, she saw only potential danger in every rocky outcropping, every dense stand of trees. Takoda rode slightly ahead, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Twice he raised his hand, halting their progress to listen intently before continuing. The third time, he dismounted suddenly, dropping into a crouch. "What is it?" Sarah whispered, clutching the twins closer. Takoda didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a small pouch at his waist, extracting a handful of what looked like crushed herbs. With deliberate movements, he sprinkled them onto the still smoking remnants of a small fire pit beside the trail. The herbs ignited with a hiss, sending up a thin column of aromatic smoke. Takoda waved his hand through it, directing the smoke upward in what Sarah recognized as a deliberate pattern. "Signal," he explained, remounting his horse, "to let watchers know it is Takoda who comes." Sarah glanced nervously at the surrounding ridges. "Aren't there a people watching us?" "Since we entered Valley." He pointed to a distant cliff where Sarah could just make out a tiny figure silhouetted against the sky. "Scout will take word ahead to camp." "What did your signal mean?" "That I come in peace, that I bring—" He hesitated. "Guests who are under my protection." They continued their ascent, the trail growing steeper and more challenging. Sarah's arms ached from holding the twins, and weariness dragged at her limbs, but she pressed on without complaint. Whatever awaited them in the Apache camp, it had to be better than certain death in the desert. As they rounded a sharp bend in the trail, the camp suddenly appeared below them, a collection of wickiups and tipis arranged in a rough circle in a protected valley. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and Sarah could see figures moving about, engaged in the daily tasks of life. At the sight of riders approaching, activity in the camp ceased. People gathered at the edge, watching their descent with wary stillness. "Stay close," Takoda murmured. "Do not show fear." Easy for him to say, Sarah thought, her heart hammering against her ribs. Still, she straightened her back and raised her chin, determined not to cower. As they drew closer, Sarah could make out individual faces, men with stern expressions, women clutching children to their sides, elders whose weathered features revealed nothing of their thoughts. A group of warriors moved to the front, hands resting meaningfully on weapons. Takoda raised his arm in greeting, calling out in his native tongue. The tension in the air was palpable as they rode the final distance into the camp, stopping several yards from the gathered Apache. An older warrior stepped forward, a tall man with streaks of gray in his long hair and deep lines etched into his face. He spoke sharply to Takoda, his eyes never leaving Sarah. Takoda dismounted, responding in the same language. The exchange grew heated, the older warrior gesturing emphatically towards Sarah and the twins. Other voices joined in, creating a storm of incomprehensible words. Sarah remained on her horse, feeling desperately exposed under the hostile stares. William began to fuss, sensing her tension, and she bounced him gently, murmuring soothing words while keeping her eyes fixed on Takoda. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and an elderly woman emerged. Despite her age, she moved with dignity and purpose, her silver-streaked hair falling in two long braids, framing a face that bore a striking resemblance to Takoda's. His mother, Sarah realized with certainty. The woman, Niabi, she would later learn, approached slowly, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the strange white woman who had arrived with her son. When she reached Sarah's horse, she stopped, looking up with an expression that combined curiosity with unmistakable wariness. "Nahimana," she said, the question clear despite the language barrier. Takoda moved to his mother's side. "Sarah Mitchell," he corrected gently, "and her sons, William and Henry." Niabi's gaze shifted to the infants, her expression softening slightly. She spoke again to Takoda, who translated for Sarah. "My mother asks, 'How old are your children?' 1 week, Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "They were born just before I began my journey." When Takoda translated, a murmur ran through the crowd. Niabi's eyebrows rose, and she said something that made several of the women exchange glances. "What did she say?" Sarah asked. "She says you have strong spirit to travel with newborns." Dakota's expression held a hint of pride. It is respected. The older warrior interrupted, speaking forcefully to Dakota. Niabi held up her hand, silencing him with a sharp word. She turned back to Sarah, pointing to the twins. She wishes to see them, Dakota explained. Sarah hesitated only briefly before carefully dismounting with Dakota's help. Her legs trembled beneath her, from exhaustion, fear, or both. She couldn't tell. Standing before Niabi, she slowly unwrapped the carrier cloth, revealing the twins' faces. The elderly woman leaned forward, studying the babies intently. After a moment, she reached out with weathered fingers, gently touching first William's forehead, then Henry's. She spoke softly, the words flowing like water. She says they have good spirits, Dakota translated, strong like their mother. Relief washed through Sarah. Whatever test this had been, it seemed she had passed. But the respite was short-lived. The older warrior stepped forward again, speaking rapidly and pointing to the mountains they had traversed. Dakota's jaw tightened. Nashoba questions why I bring white woman to our camp, says soldiers will follow, says your people killed many Apache. I have harmed no one, Sarah said, meeting Nashoba's hostile glare. My sons and I were alone, in danger. Dakota saved our lives. When Dakota translated, Nashoba spat on the ground, replying with obvious disdain. He says many white women say same before their men come with guns, Dakota said grimly. Sarah felt a flash of anger cutting through her fear. I lost my husband to fever before my sons were born, she said, her voice rising. I have no men coming for me. I seek only safety for my children. As Dakota relayed her words, Henry began to cry in earnest, his wails echoing in the tense silence. Sarah bounced him gently, trying to soothe him, but the baby's distress only increased. To everyone's surprise, Dakota stepped forward and held out his arms. May I? Aware of the watching crowd, Sarah handed Henry to him. The warrior cradled the infant with practiced ease, beginning the same haunting melody he had sung before. Henry's cries immediately began to subside. The effect on the gathered Apache was immediate. Expressions of hostility gave way to confusion, then curiosity. Niabi's eyes widened as she watched her son singing to the white woman's child with such tenderness. She spoke again, this time directly to Dakota, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a mother demanding answers from her son. Dakota met her gaze steadily as he replied, still holding Henry against his chest. Whatever he said caused Niabi to step back slightly, her expression softening with understanding. She turned to Nashoba and the other warriors, speaking with quiet authority. A debate ensued, voices rising and falling like the wind through pine needles. Sarah stood motionless, acutely aware that her fate and that of her children hung in the balance of a discussion she could not understand. She looked to Dakota, who continued to hold Henry, his free hand now resting protectively on her shoulder. What's happening? She whispered. Council will decide, he answered quietly. But my mother speaks for you. She says anyone who travels with weak old twins deserves shelter, not scorn. He paused, adding, and that any woman who would risk herself to save her son's life has earned right to be heard. Sarah blinked in surprise. You told them I saved you? Dakota nodded. Truth is strongest weapon we have now. Finally, Niabi turned back to them, her expression composed once more. She spoke directly to Sarah, though the words were meaningless to her ears. My mother says you and your children may stay, Dakota translated, relief evident in his voice. For 3 days, then council will decide again. 3 days, a reprieve, not a pardon. Still, it was more than Sarah had dared hope for when they'd entered the camp. "Thank you," she said, inclining her head respectfully to Niabi. The elderly woman nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned and spoke to several of the younger women, who hurried away toward one of the larger wiki-ups. "Come," Takoda said, still cradling Henry. "My mother has ordered a place prepared for you and the children." As they moved through the camp, following Niabi, Sarah felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, some curious, others still openly hostile. Nashoba and several warriors watched their progress with undisguised suspicion. "Will we be safe here?" she asked quietly. Takoda's expression was solemn. "You are under my protection, and now my mother's. No one will harm you." He glanced down at Henry, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "But 3 days is not long. We must convince them you are no threat. And if we can't?" His silence was answer enough. The wiki-up assigned to Sarah was small but clean, its domed structure crafted from juniper branches and covered with hides and woven mats. Inside, fresh pine boughs created a fragrant bed, topped with soft furs and blankets. A small fire pit occupied the center, smoke rising through an opening in the roof. Exhaustion claimed Sarah almost immediately. She collapsed onto the makeshift bed with the twins nestled beside her, falling into a deep sleep while Takoda spoke quietly with his mother outside. She awoke to filtered sunlight and the soft sounds of women's voices just beyond the wiki-up entrance. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind before memory rushed back. The Apache camp, the tense reception, the 3-day reprieve. The twins stirred beside her, William's face scrunching with hunger. As Sarah positioned herself to nurse them, the wiki-up's entrance flap lifted, revealing Niabi's weathered face. The older woman paused, her expression softening at the sight of Sarah feeding her children. Niabi entered, followed by 2 younger women carrying wooden bowls and a water skin. Without speaking, they placed these items near Sarah, then retreated to the entrance. Niabi remained, watching Sarah with the same intense scrutiny she had shown the day before. "Thank you," Sarah said, nodding toward the food. Niabi touched her own chest. "Niabi," she said clearly, then gestured to Sarah. "Sarah," she replied, understanding the request for introduction. Niabi nodded, then pointed to the twins. "William, Henry," she said carefully, the English name sounding strange on her tongue. Sarah was surprised that Takoda's mother had remembered their names. "Yes," she confirmed with a smile. Niabi spoke in her own language, then made cradling motions with her arms, clearly asking a question about the babies. "1 week old," Sarah said, holding up a single finger. The older woman's eyebrows rose. She touched Sarah's arm, then made a gesture that seemed to indicate strength or endurance, nodding approvingly. Despite the language barrier, Sarah felt a tentative connection forming. Motherhood, it seemed, created its own universal language. Niabi spoke again, pointing outside, then to Sarah's dirty, travel-worn dress. One of the younger women stepped forward, holding out a simple buckskin dress. "She wants you to bathe and change," the woman said in halting English. "I speak little English. Mission school." Named Taluta. Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face, for Taluta smiled slightly. "Few of us learn white man's words, useful sometimes." "Thank you, Taluta," Sarah said gratefully. "Please tell Niabi I appreciate her kindness." After Taluta translated, Niabi responded with a brief nod, then spoke again at length. "She says, babies need fresh air and sun," Taluta explained. "And while you bathe, she will watch them." Sarah hesitated, maternal instinct warring with the need to establish trust. Finally, she nodded, carefully handing the now sleeping twins to Niabi, who cradled them with the practiced ease of a woman who had held many infants. Taluta led Sarah to a secluded pool, fed by a small waterfall. The cool water was heavenly against her skin, washing away days of dust and fear. The buckskin dress, though simpler than her own clothing, fit surprisingly well and felt soft against her clean skin. When they returned to the main camp, Sarah saw Niabi sitting outside her wickiup, the twins lying on a soft blanket beside her. Several women had gathered around, admiring the babies with the universal delight women seem to take in newborns. More surprising was the sight of Takoda, kneeling beside his mother, one hand gently resting on Henry's chest. He looked up as Sarah approached, his expression warming in a way that made her heart beat faster. "You look rested," he said, rising to his feet. "The Apache dress suits you." Sarah felt herself blushing under his gaze. "Your mother has been very kind. She is curious about you." He glanced at the gathered women, who were watching their interaction with undisguised interest. "They all are. White woman who travels alone with newborn twins is not common sight." "What have you told them about me?" Sarah asked. "Truth, that I found you about to be killed by bandits, that you saved my life." He paused. "Nay, that you are a brave woman who deserves respect." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion at the edge of camp drew their attention. Neshoba had returned with several warriors, dismounting from their horses with urgent movements. They spoke rapidly to the men who gathered around them, gesturing toward the mountains. Takoda's expression darkened. "Stay here," he instructed, striding toward the group. Sarah watched anxiously as he joined the discussion, the conversation growing increasingly heated. Takoda stood tall among them, his posture tense but controlled as he responded to Neshoba's animated speech. "What happens?" she asked Taluta, who had remained nearby. The young woman frowned. "Neshoba's hunting party saw soldiers in valley below, many soldiers." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. Army patrols in Apache territory rarely ended peacefully. "They search for raiders," Taluta continued, "but find Apache, always make trouble." Takoda broke away from the group, returning to Sarah with a grim expression. "Patrol of 20 soldiers in valley," he confirmed. "Neshoba says they follow trail that leads to our camp." "My trail," Sarah realized with horror. "They're following me." "No," Takoda shook his head. "Soldiers were already searching these mountains before we arrived. Looking for raiders who attacked trading post." His jaw tightened. "But Neshoba says it is your fault, says white woman brings white man's army. What will happen?" "Council meets now. Someone to leave this place, find new camp deeper in mountains." He glanced at the twins. "Journey would be hard for little ones." "And some want to send me away," Sarah guessed, seeing the truth in his eyes. "Neshoba says you should go to soldiers." "Tell them Apache not responsible for raid." Takoda's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could sense his disagreement with this plan. "That would put you at risk," she said, understanding immediately. "If I lead soldiers here, or tell them about you killing the bandits." He nodded once. Some might not believe bandits were real raiders, easier to blame Apache. "I won't do it," Sarah said firmly. "I won't put you or your people in danger." Something shifted in Takoda's expression, surprise followed by a deeper emotion she couldn't name. "Council decides soon," he said quietly. "I must speak for you." As he turned to join the gathering of elders and warriors, Sarah impulsively caught his hand. "Takoda." He looked down at their joined hands, then up to her face. "I trust you," she said simply. His fingers tightened briefly around hers before he released them and walked away, his straight back and proud shoulders carrying the weight of her fate. The council meeting stretched for hours. From outside the large central wickiup where the elders gathered, Sarah could hear the rise and fall of voices, sometimes sharp with anger, other times low and measured. She sat with Niabi and several other women, the twins sleeping peacefully nearby, their tiny faces oblivious to the fact that their future hung in the balance of words exchanged in a language their mother couldn't understand. Taluta occasionally translated snippets of conversation that filtered through the wickiup walls. "Neshoba speaks against you still," she murmured. "Says soldiers come for white woman, we'll find Apache instead." "And Takoda?" Sarah asked, her heart constricting with worry. "He speaks well, with honor." Taluta's expression was solemn. "But Neshoba has many friends, much influence." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the camp in hues of gold and amber, the council finally emerged. Sarah studied their faces, seeking some hint of their decision, but their expressions revealed nothing. Takoda approached her, his features composed but tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved away from the gathered tribe members toward the edge of camp where a large oak provided shade and relative privacy. The twins remained with Niabi, who had refused Sarah's attempt to retrieve them, with a firm shake of her head and a gesture indicating she would watch them. "What happened?" Sarah asked when they were out of earshot. "Council is divided." Takoda sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had never seen him make before, revealing his frustration. "Some believe you should be escorted to nearest white settlement. Others say you should approach soldiers, explain that Apache not responsible for raids. And you," his dark eyes met hers, "I told them such actions would endanger you and the children, that bandits who attacked you might have friends among settlements, that soldiers might not believe your word about raiders." What did they decide? 3 days remain, as promised. His jaw tightened. But scouts watch soldiers' movements. If patrol comes too close to camp, he didn't need to finish the thought. If the soldiers discovered the Apache camp, Sarah and her children would become the least of their concerns. "I've brought danger to your people," she said, the realization hitting her with fresh force. "Perhaps I should leave, find the soldiers myself." "No." Takoda's response was immediate, his hand closing around her wrist with gentle firmness. "Too dangerous. Bandits still out there, soldiers trigger-happy, you and children would not survive." The certainty in his voice sent a chill through her. "Then what can we do?" "We wait. We show my people that you are not threat." His expression softened slightly. "Already, some see truth. My mother speaks for you now." Sarah glanced back toward the camp, where Niabi sat with the twins, her weathered hands gently stroking their fine hair. "Why?" "She doesn't even know me. She knows what she sees. Woman who protects her children, woman who saved her son." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Woman who treats Apache with respect, not fear." That evening, the atmosphere in camp remained tense, conversations hushed and glances wary. Sarah ate the stew provided by Taluta, acutely aware of Neshoba watching her from across the central fire, his eyes dark with mistrust. After the meal, as women began their evening tasks, Taluta approached with a basket of corn that needed shucking. "You help?" she asked. Sarah nodded eagerly, grateful for the chance to contribute. She sat with several women, including Niabi, working in companionable silence, broken only by Taluta's occasional translations. The repetitive task was soothing, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite the underlying tension. When William began to fuss, Niabi lifted him with practiced ease, cradling him while Sarah continued working. The older woman hummed softly, a melody that reminded Sarah of Takoda's song. His grandmother's song, Taluta explained, noticing Sarah's expression. She teaches Takoda when he's small boy. A short time later, Takoda himself appeared, joining the circle of women without self-consciousness. He sat beside his mother, speaking to her in soft tones while gently stroking William's cheek with one finger. "He never showed such softness before," Taluta whispered to Sarah. "Not since sister died." Sarah watched as Takoda took William from Niabi, cradling the infant with such tenderness that her heart ached. Around the circle, the Apache women exchanged meaningful glances, their earlier wariness giving way to curiosity and, in some faces, understanding. Later, as Sarah prepared for sleep in her wickiup, Takoda appeared at the entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. "May I enter?" he asked formally. Sarah nodded, suddenly conscious of her loosened hair and the simple nightdress Taluta had provided. Takoda sat cross-legged near the small fire, his face illuminated by its warm glow. For a moment, he simply watched the sleeping twins, his expression unreadable. "When I found you in ravine," he said finally, "I acted without thought, saw woman, children in danger, did what warrior must do." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Now, I think too much. About consequences, about futures." Sarah's heart quickened. "What futures do you see?" "Many paths, all difficult." His voice grew softer, "But one truth remains. I cannot regret saving you, Sarah Mitchell, whatever comes." The way he spoke her name with such quiet intensity made her breath catch. "I don't regret being saved," she whispered. Something passed between them in that moment, unspoken but powerful, a recognition of feelings neither dared name. Takoda broke the spell first, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Sleep well," he said. "Tomorrow brings new challenges." As he disappeared into the night, Sarah touched her wrist where his fingers had encircled it earlier, the phantom warmth of his skin against hers lingering like a promise. Dawn of the third day broke with ominous clouds gathering over the mountains, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Sarah woke to the sounds of urgent voices outside her wickiup. The twins stirred beside her, Henry's tiny face scrunching with hunger. As she nursed them, the wickiup flap opened, revealing Taluta's worried face. "Scouts return," she said without preamble. Soldiers moving closer, following trail to camp. Sarah's heart sank. "Are they certain it's our trail they're following?" "Not certain," Taluta admitted, "but Nashoba says yes. Says soldiers search for white woman." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Wrapping the twins quickly, Sarah emerged from the wickiup to see several warriors riding into camp, their expressions grim. Takoda was among them, his face streaked with dust from hard riding. The camp erupted in activity, women gathering children, men checking weapons, elders conferring in urgent whispers. Niabi appeared at Sarah's side, her weathered hand closing around Sarah's arm with surprising strength as she led her toward the center of camp, where Takoda now stood with the other warriors. Nashoba's voice rose above the others, his finger pointing accusingly at Sarah as he addressed the gathered tribe. Though she couldn't understand his words, the meaning was clear from the angry gestures and the contemptuous glances thrown her way. "He says soldiers follow white woman's trail," Taluta translated, appearing silently beside Sarah. "Says you led them here on purpose." "That's not true," Sarah protested, clutching the twins closer. "I would never." "Nashoba says you must go to soldiers," Taluta continued. Tell them Apache not here. Lead them away from camp." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the gathered Apache. Sarah felt fear crystallizing in her chest as she realized how quickly sentiment had turned against her. Dakota stepped forward then, his voice steady and commanding as he addressed his people. He spoke at length, occasionally gesturing towards Sarah and the babies, his expression resolute. "What is he saying?" Sarah whispered to Taluta. "He says sending you to soldiers is death sentence. Says no honor in using women and newborns as bait." Taluta's eyes remained fixed on Dakota as he continued speaking. "He says you saved his life, that your heart is true." Niabi stepped forward, joining her son. Her voice, though aged, carried the weight of wisdom and authority. She spoke directly to Neshoba, her words measured but firm. "She says you have shown courage," Taluta translated, "that you respect Apache ways. That any mother who travels with week-old twins through desert has strength worthy of Apache woman." Sarah was stunned by Niabi's defense. The older woman had barely spoken to her directly, yet here she was, standing against Neshoba on her behalf. The debate grew more heated, voices rising in argument. Sarah stood helplessly, the twins beginning to fuss in response to the tension around them. Suddenly, Henry let out a piercing wail, his tiny face reddening with the effort. To everyone's surprise, Dakota strode directly to Sarah, reaching for the crying infant with natural confidence. As he had done before, he cradled Henry against his chest, humming the melody that always seemed to soothe the baby. Within moments, Henry's cries subsided to soft hiccups. The sight of the fierce Apache warrior tenderly holding the white woman's child created a profound silence. Neshoba stared, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. The other tribe members exchanged glances, some nodding slightly as if confirming something long suspected. Niabi spoke again, this time directly to Neshoba, her voice carrying a note of challenge. When Taluta didn't immediately translate, Sarah looked to her questioningly. "She asks if Neshoba would send child to die," Taluta explained quietly. "Asks if his honor allows sacrifice of innocent." Neshoba's response was sharp, but less certain than before. He gestured toward the mountains, clearly speaking of the approaching soldiers. "He says tribe must be protected first," Taluta continued. "It says one white woman, even with babies, not worth risk to whole tribe." It was then that Dakota spoke again, his voice resonating with a depth of emotion Sarah had never heard from him before. Still holding Henry, he addressed not just Neshoba, but all his people, his free hand moving to rest lightly on Sarah's shoulder. Taluta's eyes widened as she listened, and she hesitated before translating. "What?" Sarah pressed. "What did he say?" "He says," Taluta swallowed, "he says you and children are his family now, that he claims you under Apache law of protection." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Dakota, who met her gaze with unwavering intensity. "He says he will leave tribe if necessary," Taluta continued, "take you and children to safety himself." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered Apache. For a warrior to declare willingness to leave his tribe, his family, his people, was no small thing. It was a sacrifice of identity, of belonging. Neshoba stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes as he responded to Dakota's declaration. The two men stood face to face, neither yielding, the tension between them palpable. Suddenly, a young scout burst into the circle, his chest heaving from exertion. He spoke rapidly, pointing toward the eastern ridge with urgent gestures. "Soldiers," Taluta whispered, her face paling. "Close now. We'll reach camp by midday." Panic rippled through the camp. Women began gathering essentials, warriors checked weapons, and children were hurried toward the forest paths that led deeper into the mountains. Neshoba turned to Takoda with a triumphant expression, speaking words that needed no translation. The white woman had indeed brought destruction to their door. In that moment of chaos, with the tribe preparing for flight and the threat of armed conflict looming, Sarah made a decision. She stepped forward, handing William to Niabi, who accepted the baby with surprise. "Tell them I will go," she said firmly to Taluta. "I will find the soldiers and lead them away from the camp." Taluta's eyes widened. But Takoda said, "Tell them," Sarah insisted. "Please." As Taluta translated her words, Sarah watched the expressions shifting on the faces around her. Surprise, suspicion, and from Neshoba, satisfaction. But it was Takoda's reaction that cut deepest, the shock in his eyes, the flash of betrayal quickly masked by warrior's control. "Oh no," he said, his voice low but fierce. "Too dangerous." "It's the only way," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I won't be responsible for bringing harm to your people." She glanced at Henry, still cradled in Takoda's arms. "Take care of my sons. Keep them safe until I return." "If you go, you will not return," Takoda said flatly. "Soldiers will not let you come back." "Then my boys will have a chance at life," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking despite her resolve. "With someone who will protect them." Niabi stepped forward, speaking directly to Sarah for the first time in halting English. "You go die." Sarah swallowed hard. "Better me than all of you." Takoda's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath the skin. He spoke rapidly to his mother, who nodded reluctantly. "What did you tell her?" Sarah asked. "That you are foolish, brave woman," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "That I will bring you back." Sarah blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I go with you," Takoda said, his tone allowing no argument. "We find soldiers together." "Tell story that protects both Apache and you." "But the risk—" "No more words," he interrupted, handing Henry gently to Taluta. "We go now, no time." As the camp continued its frantic preparations for departure, Takoda led Sarah to where the horses were kept. Niabi followed with William, her expression solemn as she watched her son prepare for what might be his final journey. Sarah knelt before the twins, now held by Niabi and Taluta. She kissed each tiny face, breathing in their scent, memorizing the feel of their soft skin beneath her lips. "I will come back to you," she whispered, though in her heart she feared it was a promise she might not be able to keep. When she rose, she found Niabi watching her with an expression of profound understanding. The older woman reached out, placing her weathered palm against Sarah's cheek in a gesture that transcended language, one mother to another, acknowledging the sacrifice being made. As Sarah mounted her horse, the clouds overhead finally broke, releasing a gentle rain that mingled with the tears on her cheeks. Takoda rode beside her, his face set in lines of grim determination. Together, they rode away from the camp, toward the eastern ridge where soldiers waited, leaving behind 2 tiny lives that had, in the span of a few short days, become the heart of an unexpected bond between people from worlds apart. Rain fell in gentle sheets, softening the earth beneath the horses' hooves as Sarah and Takoda descended from the mountain toward the valley where the soldiers had been spotted. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, Sarah's mind constantly returning to the twins she had left behind, Takoda's face set in the expressionless mask of a warrior preparing for battle. When they paused on a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the terrain below, Sarah finally spoke, her voice barely audible above the pattering rain. "What will you tell them, the soldiers?" Dakota's eyes remained fixed on the valley. Truth. That bandits attacked trading post, that I tracked them, that I found you and saved you from same bandits. But the bandits are dead, Sarah said. You killed them. Yes. His jaw tightened. Self-defense, protecting women and children. Will they believe you? A lone Apache warrior. Dakota turned to her then, his dark eyes holding hers. They will believe you. The simple statement carried the weight of absolute trust, a trust Sarah was not certain she deserved. She had left her children, the most precious things in her life, with people she had known for mere days. What kind of mother did that make her? I should never have left them, she whispered, doubt gnawing at her resolve. You did what mother must do, Dakota replied. Protect children at any cost. He reached across the space between them, his hand closing over hers with gentle pressure. We will return to them, I promise. The certainty in his voice steadied her, as it had since the moment he had appeared in the ravine, like a shadow detached from the canyon wall. She nodded, gathering her courage. They continued their descent, the terrain growing less steep as they approached the valley floor. In the distance, thin trails of smoke rose into the rain-heavy sky, campfires of the soldiers now less than an hour's ride away. When we meet soldiers, Dakota said, let me speak first, then you confirm. And if they don't listen, if they try to arrest you, his expression remained impassive. Then you take horses, ride back to camp. To children, I won't leave you, Sarah said fiercely, surprising herself with the vehemence of her declaration. Dakota's eyes softened, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Always stubborn, Sarah Mitchell. Before she could respond, the distinctive crack of a rifle split the air. Their horses reared in panic as bullets kicked up dirt mere feet from where they stood. Ambush! Dakota shouted, urging his horse forward to shield Sarah's. Ride! But it was too late. Figures emerged from the trees and rocks around them, not soldiers in uniform, but rough-looking men with bandanas covering the lower halves of their faces. Bandits, more of them than Sarah could quickly count. Well, look what we found, drawled a tall man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The Apache dog who killed our friends and his white woman. Dakota had already notched an arrow, his bow drawn and aimed at the leader's chest. Back away, he commanded. Let woman go. The scarred man laughed. Don't think so, Injun. See, those men you killed, they was our brothers, and we don't take kindly to family business left unfinished. Sarah's mind raced. These were associates of the bandits who had attacked her in the ravine. The same gang that had raided the trading post. They must have been tracking Dakota, seeking revenge. The army patrol, she realized aloud. There never was one, was there? Smart lady, the scarred man grinned. Amazing what panic a few rumors can cause. Soldiers coming works every time to flush out hiding Injuns. Dakota's expression hardened as understanding dawned. The reports of soldiers had been a ruse. False information spread to create exactly the fear and chaos that had divided the Apache camp. Now drop the bow, Injun, the leader continued, his own rifle aimed steadily at Dakota. Or the lady gets a bullet first. Sarah saw Dakota calculating, knew he was measuring the odds. 7 bandits against 1 warrior and an unarmed woman. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his bow. The moment his weapon dipped, 2 bandits rushed forward, yanking Dakota from his horse and driving him to his knees, while others seized Sarah, rough hands pulling her from her saddle. Take her to the camp, the leader ordered. She'll fetch a good price in Mexico. He turned his attention to Dakota, who knelt in the mud, hands now bound behind his back. This one I'll handle personally. Fear like Sarah had never known coursed through her veins, not for herself, but for Takoda. She struggled against her captors, desperation lending her strength. "No! Let him go!" The leader approached Takoda, drawing a wicked-looking knife from his belt. "Oh, an Apache scalp still pays well in some territories," he said, the blade catching dull light despite the rain. What happened next unfolded with such speed that Sarah would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. A war cry, high and fierce, shattered the tense scene. Arrows whistled through the rain-soaked air, finding targets with deadly accuracy. 2 bandits fell immediately, others scattered for cover, firing wildly into the surrounding trees. Apache warriors emerged from the forest like spirits materializing from mist. Among them Nashoba, his face painted for battle, his rifle aimed with deadly precision. In the chaos, Sarah broke free from her distracted captor, running to Takoda and tugging desperately at his bonds. The scarred leader, realizing the tide had turned, lunged toward them with a roar of rage. Knife raised for a killing strike. Sarah threw herself in front of Takoda, her eyes closed, body braced for the bite of steel. Instead, she heard a sickening thud. Opening her eyes, she saw the bandit frozen in mid-stride, shock etched on his features as he stared down at the arrow protruding from his chest. As he crumpled to the ground, Sarah looked up to see Nashoba lowering his bow, his expression unreadable. The skirmish ended as quickly as it had begun. The remaining bandits, outnumbered and outmatched, fled into the forest, pursued by several warriors. Nashoba approached slowly, his gaze moving from Sarah to Takoda, who had managed to work free of his loosened bonds. "You followed us," Takoda said, rising to his feet. Nashoba nodded once. "And I did not trust white woman," he admitted in halting English, "thought she might betray lead soldiers to us." He looked at Sarah, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "I was wrong." "You saved our lives," Sarah said, still trembling from the narrow escape. Nashoba's weathered face remained stern, but he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. "You stood before knife for Takoda, ready to die." He glanced at Takoda. "Ah, she has warrior's heart." High on the ridge above them, a signal call echoed, 3 short whistles. Nashoba responded with a similar pattern, then turned back to them. "No soldiers. Scouts have searched. Bandits lied." Relief washed through Sarah like a physical force. "Then the camp is safe. The children." "Safe," Nashoba confirmed. "Niabi keeps them. Waits for mother's return." Takoda placed his hand on Nashoba's shoulder, speaking earnestly in their shared language. The older warrior listened, then nodded, replying with equal intensity. "What did you say?" Sarah asked when they had finished. "I thanked him for wisdom to follow us," Takoda explained, "for courage to admit mistake." He paused. "And I asked permission to bring you and children back to camp." "As my family," Sarah's heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "And he says choice is not his alone, but he will speak for us to counsel." Takoda's eyes held hers. "If that is what you wish." The implication of his words hung in the rain-washed air between them. This was more than an offer of protection. It was an invitation to a shared life, a future neither of them could have imagined when they first met in that dusty ravine. And if I say yes," Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "what then?" "Then I teach your sons to hunt, to track, to respect all living things," Takoda said, taking a step closer to her. "Teach them ways of both worlds, their father's and mine, and you." His hand rose to gently touch her rain-dampened cheek. "You become my heart." Sarah closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The journey that had begun in desperation, a widow fleeing with newborn twins into uncertain territory, had led her here to this moment, to this man who had risked everything to protect her and her children. "Yes," she said simply, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Yes." The ride back to the Apache camp was markedly different from their departure. What had been a solemn procession became a triumphant return, with Neshoba himself riding beside them, the other warriors forming an honor guard that announced their approach with whoops and calls that echoed through the mountains. As they crested the final ridge, Sarah saw the camp spread out below, the people gathered at its edge, waiting. Her eyes searched anxiously until she spotted Niabi, standing tall and dignified with a bundle cradled in each arm. The twins! Sarah urged her horse forward, outdistancing even Takoda in her eagerness to reach her children. She dismounted before the animal had fully stopped, rushing to Niabi with tears streaming down her face. The older woman smiled, the first true smile Sarah had seen from her, and gently placed the sleeping infants in their mother's outstretched arms. William and Henry, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded, yawned and snuggled against her chest as if she had never left. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, looking up at Niabi with overflowing gratitude. "Thank you for keeping them safe." Niabi touched Sarah's cheek in the same gesture she had made before their departure, a touch of understanding between mothers. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against Sarah's in a gesture of acceptance and blessing. Takoda joined them, his hand coming to rest lightly on Sarah's shoulder. Niabi looked at her son, then at Sarah and the twins, speaking softly in Apache. "What did she say?" Sarah asked. Takoda's voice was rough with emotion as he translated. "She says our family is whole now." That evening, as stars emerged in the clearing sky, the Apache gathered for a celebration, not just of the victory over the bandits, but of something more profound. At the center of the gathering, Takoda stood tall and proud, with Sarah beside him, the twins in their cradle boards at their feet. The ceremony was simple but sacred, ancient words spoken by tribal elders, blessings offered, promises exchanged. Sarah didn't need Taluta's translations to understand the meaning. In the eyes of the Apache, she and her sons were no longer outsiders. They were family. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah and Takoda slipped away to the edge of camp, finding a moment of privacy beneath the vast canvas of stars. "Are you certain of this path?" Takoda asked, his hand entwining with hers. "Life with Apache not easy." "Not safe always." Sarah looked back at the camp where her sons now slept peacefully under Niabi's watchful eye. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the fear, the desperate courage that had driven her into the desert with newborn twins. "Life is never certain," she said softly. "James taught me that when he died, leaving me alone with 2 babies yet to be born." She squeezed Takoda's hand. But I've learned that family isn't always born from blood. Sometimes it's forged in fire, in moments when one soul recognizes another across all the barriers the world has built." Takoda's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he searched her eyes. "You are a wise woman, Sarah Mitchell." "I'm a survivor," she corrected with a small smile. "Like you, like your people." She leaned into his touch. "And Dan, now, your people are my people." In the soft glow of moonlight, Takoda lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise, a seal on the covenant they had made, a bridge between worlds that had once seemed irreconcilably distant. When they returned to the celebration, Neshoba approached, his stern features softened by the firelight. He spoke briefly to Takoda, then surprised Sarah by extending his hand to her in the white man's gesture of agreement. "He says you have proven worth to tribe," Dakota translated as Sarah clasped Neshoba's weathered hand. "Says any woman who would face knife for Apache warrior has earned place by fire." As the night deepened and the celebration gradually quieted, Sarah sat beside Dakota near the central fire, the sleeping twins nestled between them. Niabi joined them, settling on Sarah's other side with the natural comfort of family. "Tomorrow, I teach you Apache words for mother, father, grandmother," the older woman said in her limited English, patting Sarah's hand. "Children learn both ways?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I would like that very much." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the boundaries and conflicts of the world below. In their light, a warrior who had lost his family and a widow who had feared for her children's future had found something neither had dared to hope for: a second chance, a new beginning. And in the quiet hours before dawn, as the last embers of the celebration fire faded to ash, Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah of the Apache, slept peacefully beside the man who had emerged from shadow to become her protector, her partner, her heart's home in a land that no longer seemed quite so harsh or unforgiving.